A single unanswered question can unravel everything we believe about the past. What if the most disturbing mysteries ever recorded were never meant to be solved? Strange disappearances, impossible clues, and silent evidence keep resurfacing where they shouldn't. The truth feels close, yet something ensures it never fully emerges. On a cold afternoon in May 1828, the streets of Nuremberg were unsettled by an unusual figure emerging into public view. A young man stood unsteadily in the town square, his movements uncertain as if the world itself was unfamiliar to him. His clothes were worn, his speech fragmented, and in his hand he carried a letter addressed to a cavalry captain. With that appearance began one of Europe's most enduring enigmas, the case of Caspar Hauser. The letter claimed the boy had been raised in complete isolation, confined to a dark space for as long as he could remember, with minimal human contact. According to its contents, he had been provided only basic sustenance and the most rudimentary guidance in writing his name. Whether this account was truthful, exaggerated, or deliberately constructed remains one of the earliest uncertainties in the case. The man himself seemed almost detached from the ordinary rhythms of society, as though light, language, and space were still foreign concepts. In the days that followed, Caspar Hauser became both a curiosity and a subject of scientific interest. Residents of Nuremberg observed him with a mixture of sympathy and suspicion. He appeared childlike in many ways, yet capable of learning with remarkable speed. Teachers and physicians attempted to document his progress, noting his unusual sensitivities. Bright lights caused distress, certain sounds overwhelmed him, and even simple social interactions seemed to require immense effort. Yet beneath this surface narrative of a feral child adapting to civilization, inconsistencies began to emerge. Some observers believed his condition was genuine, a rare case of extreme isolation producing developmental delay. Others, however, questioned whether his behavior was too theatrical, too carefully aligned with expectations of what such a victim might look like. Could it be that the mystery was not only in his origins, but in the possibility that his origins were being performed? As his fame spread, Caspar Hauser was moved between households and institutions, each attempting to educate and observe him. He learned to read and write more fluently, and his accounts of his supposed confinement became more structured. He described a dim environment, an unseen caretaker, and a life without clear memory of time. Yet, no physical evidence of the place he described was ever found, and no witness could confirm its existence. This gap between testimony and verification opened the door to competing interpretations. Some early investigators suggested that he might have been the victim of an illegal custody arrangement, hidden for unknown reasons. Others proposed that he had been deliberately abandoned and later discovered. More speculative voices went further, suggesting that he might have been connected to aristocratic lineage, hidden away to protect or control inheritance claims. These theories, while never proven, reflected the broader uncertainty surrounding identity and power in early 19th century Europe. Medical examinations of the time could not provide definitive answers. Physicians debated whether his physical and psychological traits were consistent with long-term confinement. Some argued that his motor skills and cognition were too developed for someone with his claimed history. Others countered that human adaptability, even under extreme deprivation, was still not fully understood. In this space of incomplete science, interpretation often replaced certainty. What makes the case particularly compelling is not only what was observed, but what could never be confirmed. No clear record of his early childhood exists. No verifiable witnesses to his alleged imprisonment ever came forward. Even the letter that accompanied him has been questioned for its origin and authenticity. Each piece of evidence, when examined closely, seems to dissolve into ambiguity. Years later, Caspar Hauser's life took a darker turn. In 1833, he was found gravely wounded in Ansbach, claiming he had been attacked by an unknown assailant. He described being lured under false pretenses before suffering a fatal injury. Yet once again, the details of the event resisted clarity. The location, the motive, and even the identity of the attacker remained unresolved. 3 days later, Music, he died from his injuries, leaving behind more questions than answers. The circumstances of his death intensified speculation. Some believed it was an attempt to silence him, suggesting that his origins were tied to powerful individuals or institutions unwilling to let the truth emerge. Others argued the attack may have been self-inflicted or staged, part of a psychological pattern that had been misunderstood throughout his life. The lack of definitive forensic evidence ensured that neither explanation could fully prevail. In the decades that followed, historians and researchers revisited the case repeatedly. Archives were searched, testimonies reevaluated, and earlier medical notes reinterpreted through modern perspectives. Psychological theories emerged suggesting dissociative identity, fabricated memory, or social manipulation. At the same time, more romanticized interpretations persisted, portraying him as a lost prince or hidden heir. Ideas that continued to capture public imagination despite the absence of proof. Modern analysis tends to approach the case with caution. The consensus among many scholars leans toward the possibility of deception, either by Hauser himself or by those who shaped his narrative. Yet even this conclusion does not fully resolve the inconsistencies. Certain behavioral details documented at the time still resist easy explanation. Why did so many independent observers describe him in similar terms? Why did his development follow such an unusual trajectory? And why, after nearly 2 centuries, does no definitive origin story hold up under scrutiny? Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Caspar Hauser case is not the lack of answers, but the abundance of partial ones. Each explanation accounts for some elements while failing to encompass others. Each theory resolves one contradiction only to introduce another. It is as if the story itself refuses to settle into a single stable form. Standing back from the historical record, one is left with an image that is both precise and incomplete. A young man stepping into a world he claimed never to have known, surrounded by observers who could never fully determine who he was or where he came from. Was he a victim of concealment, a product of psychological complexity, or an elaborate fabrication that took on a life of its own? Even now, in the quiet spaces between documented facts and unanswered questions, the figure of Caspar Hauser remains suspended, neither fully explained nor entirely dismissed. And so the question lingers, unchanged by time or investigation. How much of what we know about him is truth, and how much is still waiting, silently, to be uncovered? Music. The unanswered questions surrounding Caspar Hauser leave behind a familiar kind of silence, one where identity dissolves into uncertainty and history refuses to settle into a single, stable version of events. That same silence seems to echo again, but in a very different landscape, far from the stone streets of 19th century Europe. It shifts now toward wind, salt, and an endless horizon over water. Along the northern edge of the Gulf Coast of present-day Texas, near the shallow waters of Matagorda Bay, the land flattens into marsh and sand. It is a place where tides reshape the shoreline without warning, and where remnants of human presence are easily claimed by weather, time, and vegetation. Today, little remains to mark what once stood there, only faint archaeological traces and the persistent weight of a question that has never fully faded. In the late 17th century, this coastline became the stage for one of the most troubled colonial ventures in North America. The French explorer René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de la Salle, had set out to establish a foothold for France at the mouth of the Mississippi River. Instead, navigational errors and miscalculations carried his expedition hundreds of miles westward, deep into unfamiliar territory controlled by shifting alliances of indigenous groups and contested by European powers. By 1685, the expedition established a settlement known as Fort St. Louis. It was not the thriving colonial hub envisioned in France, but a fragile outpost struggling against scarcity, disease, and isolation. Supply ships failed to arrive as expected. Storms scattered provisions. Internal conflict and mistrust grew among settlers who found themselves stranded in an environment they were ill prepared to endure. The colony's location, intended as strategic, became instead a liability. Far from established French support and surrounded by unfamiliar terrain, the settlers lived under constant pressure. Food shortages became severe, illness spread, and as months turned into years, the original hope of expansion gave way to survival under increasingly uncertain conditions. Yet the most enduring mystery is not how the colony struggled, but what ultimately became of its survivors. What they reportedly found at Fort St. Louis was not a functioning settlement, but ruins. Structures stood damaged or empty. Scattered remains suggested violence or sudden collapse. Some accounts describe human bones in the vicinity. Others mentioned abandoned tools, broken belongings, and signs of a community that had vanished abruptly. But there were no clear survivors. This absence immediately raised questions that have never fully been resolved. What happened to the men, women, and children who once occupied the settlement? Did they perish in a single catastrophic event, or did their disappearance unfold gradually, dispersing across the surrounding landscape? One widely accepted interpretation suggests that the colony was attacked by local indigenous groups, possibly the Karankawa, who inhabited the coastal region. Tensions between the settlers and indigenous populations had been documented, and violence in both directions was not uncommon in frontier conditions. In this view, the colony may have been overwhelmed, its survivors killed or taken during retaliatory conflict. Yet even this explanation remains incomplete, relying on limited and fragmented records. Another possibility considers the role of disease and starvation. Life at Fort St. Louis was precarious and mortality rates were high. It is plausible that the colony simply diminished over time, its remaining members too few to sustain themselves or resist environmental pressures. In this scenario, survivors may have attempted to travel inland or along the coast, scattering into regions where their identities were eventually absorbed into other communities or lost entirely. There are also accounts, less certain, more fragmentary, suggesting that some survivors may have been taken and integrated into indigenous groups. In frontier conditions, captivity did not always mean execution. It could also lead to assimilation over time. Children in particular may have been more easily incorporated into new social structures. If this occurred, the identity of Fort St. Louis did not end in a single moment of disappearance, but rather dissolved gradually into other populations, leaving no clear trace in European records.